All right, Mark chapter 14, let's read this together, a couple of the verses. Mark chapter 14, picking up verse 1, says that after 2 days it was the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by trickery and put him to death. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar of the people. And so in verse 3, being in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. And so she broke it and the flask and poured it on his head. But there were some that were indignant among them, and they said, what was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii, that's a year's salary, and it could have been given to the poor. And they criticized her sharply. And Jesus said, yeah, lady, what are you, nuts? I can't believe you're wasting all that. I'm just kidding, I didn't read that, right? That's just how my head heard it, you know? No, in fact, Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you trouble her? And he goes on, and we'll pick up there in a moment. But before we get to this beautiful story of anointing, I got to read to you an introductory statement from John Corson on this chapter that I think will prove to be very helpful. So let me read this. John Corson says, we have now come to the longest chapter in Mark's gospel. To set the stage for this drama, it should be noted that Jesus is not so much the main actor as he is acted upon, not so much the deliverer as he is the one being delivered into the hands of men. For in the chapter before us, we see Mary anointing him, Judas betraying him, and the religious leaders arresting him, and finally, Peter denying him. So those are all things that we're going to look at in the weeks to come, because as we've been going through Mark's gospel, we've been taking it very slow this time. When my family and I moved here 9 years or so ago, we started teaching in the Gospel of Mark, and so we've come this journey back to Mark's Gospel. So we decided this time, let's take it slow. Let's get everything out of it that we can as we go a little bit slower this time. And so this week we're going to just look at a few of the details that we just read, and we'll see those other aspects of the chapter 14 in the weeks to come. But let's start with the first 2 verses. So important, stand alone, and we'll incorporate them as best we can. So look at this. It's after 2 days. So in 2 days, the Passover is about to happen. After that, it rolls into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But just something I don't want to take for granted, because there may be many of you that are new to church, new to the Bible, whatever, and you might not even know what Passover is. So understand what this feast is in a small way for Israel in their history. It's like their 4th of July, Christmas, and Thanksgiving all rolled into one. Okay, that's what it's like for them in the importance and significance. It goes all the way back to when, for hundreds of years, their nation was in captivity in Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt. God ultimately sends Moses as the deliverer, right? Famous story, of course, in Exodus. But the key event for their deliverance from Egypt, after all of the 10 plagues were poured out on Egypt, and Pharaoh's hard heart, and he refused to let the people go, finally, there was the final plague, which is where the spirit of death passed over this land. And the nation of Israel lived in Goshen, and they were told, if you want your house to be spared from this final plague of death, which means the firstborn in every household will die, if you want to be spared from that, here's what you have to do. You have to sacrifice a lamb, take its blood, put it on the header in the doorposts, and it would run into the basin of the thing. So here's an amazing thing. You have a picture of a lamb being slaughtered and in the shape of a cross on their doorframe. So as the spirit of death passed over the houses, any house that had that blood cross on it was passed over by death. There's so many symbolisms if you know the Bible and the gospel and all that. It's a beautiful picture. But here's the thing. For them, that was the key moment when Pharaoh finally said, get him out of here. Get Israel out of my face. And so they were delivered from Egypt. So understand now, all these years later, Jesus is in town. The feast of Passover is about to happen, and they're all excited. You remember the crowd has been saying, Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. They're expecting in some part, if not all the way, for the Lord Jesus to be the one who's going to deliver them from the bondage of Rome. Did you see the correlation? So as Passover and their national excitement and passion and fervor for God is ramping up, it's coming to a point where in 2 days, Passover is about to happen, and the religious leaders know, man, Jesus is getting a lot of attention. We really need to get rid of him. And they're surmising the idea of, let's just kill the guy. Let's kill him. They're saying this kind of stuff. Let's kill him. The problem is, they're in this festival season right now where everyone's getting pumped up, so they don't want to do it in and around that time at all. What's amazing, though, is they can't help but play the part they're supposed to play. They are actually going to crucify him on Passover, and he is going to die at the exact same time, John's Gospel tells us, that the Passover lamb was sacrificed. Because the New Testament teaches us that Jesus Christ is our Passover lamb. Death passes over us because Jesus died for us, and he became the Passover lamb. So the symbolism that was there from all the way back in Egypt, Jesus would be the ultimate fulfillment of that. And here's the thing, they didn't like that idea. They didn't want to do that. Not that they knew they were fulfilling scriptures. They just didn't like the fact that the people would be upset about them killing a famous character in the Jewish segment like this. And it was troubling to them. Now, it brings up a lot of lessons, a lot of ideas and thoughts for sure. And one of them is that it says that they feared the people, or they didn't want to cause the people to get an uproar. The other earlier chapters tell us they feared the multitudes. And that in and of itself is a dangerous thing, to be afraid of what people think, right? What we should be afraid of is not being honest or true, right? That's the ultimate fear we should all have. Not people. In fact, I love what Charles Spurgeon said. He said, there is no cure for the fear of man like the fear of God. There is no cure for the fear of man like the fear of God. I would much rather fear God than fear man. And here's the thing. It is either one of those two. You know that, right? These guys, these religious leaders who claim to love God and honor God with every moment of their lives, they don't fear God. Jesus has been calling them out endlessly, over and over. They don't care. They do not fear God. It tells us here over and over again, they feared the people and what the people thought of them. Many lessons to be learned and thought of that. But how about even this notion? They had a plan. They didn't want it to be at a certain time, and it happened exactly the way that they didn't want it to happen. How can anyone relate to that? You ever had your plan and idea and it didn't work out the way you thought? I don't even ask you for hands. I can already see them all up in my mind, right? I will never, and then fill in the blank, and then like 2 years later, there you are, you know. I'm never going to serve in kids' church, and like next thing you know, you're leading it. Oh, what happened? So I've learned to actually say never. In fact, I'm so smart, you know what I say? I'm never going to be a billionaire. And I look around. Isn't it weird when you say like, I'm never going to, and then like it happens to you? So that's how I figured that out. But that doesn't work for some reason. I don't know. But you know what Proverbs 16:9 says, right? Man plans his path, but the Lord ultimately directs it. Right? Man makes his plans, but God ultimately directs his path. So make your plans, do what you can, honor God with your life. But know this, you'll look back at the end of your life and you'll say, wow, Lord, you totally took the wheel, didn't you? I thought I was in control. I thought I was going to do this. I wasn't going to do that. And I did all the things I didn't expect to do. Amazing. These guys, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it on the Passover. Well, yeah, you are. Because he is going to die in our place as the Passover lamb once and for all. And there's nothing these guys can do about it. That leads us into this beautiful story. And I think we'll see the contrast between what we just talked about and this story here in a moment as we turn to John in just a minute. But let me remind you, it says, being in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, he was at a table, and a woman comes in with this alabaster flask. Now, Simon the leper is obviously the idea of he was a leper. Because if he was a leper currently, he couldn't have guests at his house. But the fact that he once was a leper is an amazing thing, because up until the time of Christ coming on earth, never had there, other than a few characters in the Old Testament, had anyone ever really been healed of leprosy, especially on a whole scale. When Christ comes, he, on a whole scale sense, heals many, many lepers, and that was in the Old Testament a sign to Israel that the Messiah had come. Do you know that? He said he'll open the eyes of the blind, he'll heal the lepers, and make the lame walk, and all that kind of stuff, everything that Jesus did, in order for Israel to be attuned to the fact the Messiah is in town. How about this famous story? Jesus heals 10 lepers and only one of them returns. Remember that story? Well, that is an amazing story for the simple fact that 10 lepers were healed all at once. 10 of them. Now, a sad reality is only one of them was thankful. But still, the point is that lepers in a wholesale sense are getting cleansed and healed, which had never been seen before in mass production. So the fact that it says Simon, who obviously was a leper, it's amazing that God had healed him. You could do some research and look into this if you want. Some believe that Simon once was a leper. Actually, the father to Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, who, if you know the area in Bethany, that was the famous house where Jesus always was. So the argument is possibly that this is really their house as well. You can look at that. That doesn't matter so much as the reality is at the table, you have the 12 disciples, you have these wonderful people, Mary, Martha, you have a man who was once a leper, and here's the best one, we're going to read it in a moment. Lazarus, who was dead for days, was raised again by Jesus Christ. Now that's my kind of party. You know what I mean? Well, who's at the table? Who's hanging out? And it's like, well, the dead guy, he's back alive, and the leper, and he's all good. And what a party, man. Imagine hanging out with Laz and like, you saw the other side? What was it like, man? I mean, come on, spill the beans, bro. Who's going to top his story? You know what I mean? No one. No one's going to top that story. But here they are having dinner, amazing dinner party, simple, humble. And here comes this woman who will identify as Mary, Martha and Lazarus' sister. She comes with this alabaster flask. It says very costly. Now, when Judas, we know it's Judas, says that it could be sold for 300 denarii, that was a year's salary. That would be like in the vicinity of $50,000 to $75,000. Now, it's not a perfume like you and I would understand it today. In fact, it was sort of, in a weird way, an investment. Like today you hear, buy gold, buy gold, buy gold, which I think is absolute nonsense, but that's, if you have gold, forgive me, we could talk about that later. But buying gold, when things go really sideways and people are hungry, they don't want to chew on gold, they want to chew on bread and animals and stuff like that, you know what I mean? So you can have all the gold in the world. If it gets real bad, your gold's going to do nothing. Anyway, it was their version of buy gold, buy gold, buy gold, or it was either that, or you would have something like this, which was from India, based on the spikenard in the flask. You would have something that would be passed down even in generations in a family. It was something that, in this case, it could be for Mary, it would be like her, if her father had passed on, it would be her dowry to a husband, her deposit that her father would have made for her. It's so expensive because once you broke the neck of it and you poured it, you had to use it all. There was no saving it or salvaging it. It was all at once. It was meant to be that way for something special like a wedding night, something that an aroma that would stay with you forever to seal that memory in your mind of being with your partner, one partner for life in a beautiful way. Or it would be used for the burial of someone you loved. In preparation or in part of putting them away, you would put over their body this smell, this odor as a blessing and as a kindness, if you will. What's fascinating about that is as Lazarus is sitting there and she uses this on him, we're going to find out it's for the Lord's burial, but she didn't use it for her own brother. Laz could have been upset. Of course, he saw the other side, so I don't think he cares anymore about stuff on earth, right? But he could be like, hey, what the heck? What am I, chopped liver? You know, what? You didn't use that for me. But she breaks this flask, and she pours it on his head. It says in this gospel. We're going to find out she pours it on his head and on his feet and then wipes his feet with her hair. Now, this is a beautiful sacrifice. Truly, we're going to find out in a moment, it's a pound worth. It's just an expensive, extreme amount of ointment to be used in such a way. Beautiful sacrifice and worship. She is giving more than something financial, friends. It's something where even the notion is, again, as a dowry, she's giving up the notion of, I've got to find this perfect man and use this as a dowry. Because she could find, because what we understand of Mary, Martha, and Laz, they have a beautiful home. They live in Bethany. They're kind of hooked up. So if she finds the right guy and she presents this alabaster flask, I mean, she could marry a top tier kind of guy, be set for life. She is literally throwing all of those hopes and dreams away in this moment She's sacrificing so much more than even money. And what's so sad is the response of the disciples led by none other than Judas himself. In fact, what's interesting is if you look at the word in verse 4, he says, why was this fragrant oil wasted? It's funny that he uses that word wasted because it's translated another way in English, perdition, which Jesus in the high priestly prayer in John 17, I believe, when he's praying that high priestly prayer, he says, Lord, everyone that you've sent to me, I've lost none of them except for one, the son of perdition, the one who chose destruction upon himself. But the word perdition there is the same word that's used, that he uses and says, this is a waste. It's waste. Judas's very life is a waste. In fact, Jesus would say in another place that it would have been better for him to never been born at all than to have lived the life that he lives. Because, you ready for this? Judas's entire life was a waste. And yet that man has the audacity to say, what kind of waste is this? Buddy, takes one to know one. You're a big old waste. That's why you might be able to identify waste. Now, something else that really gets under my skin personally, and I think a lot of you can relate, but I have a personal just pet peeve on this, is this notion of what other people could do with their resources. Does that drive anyone else crazy, by the way? I don't know. Maybe you're the kind of person that loves to sit back and talk about what other people could do with their money. I don't care. And I don't judge people. And I don't care how they got their money and all that kind of stuff. And getting into the weeds with that stuff drives me crazy. Here's what I do know. If any of us at any level have the responsibility of other people's money, you should be very respectful of that. AKA our government stinks at that, right? Government spending is a joke. They take all of our money and they do useless, crazy stuff with it with no accountability these days. It irritates me to no end. But what irritates me is spending other people's money. And you know what they say, it's easier to spend other people's money, right? Well, I would have done this. Why'd they spend that? Why'd they buy that? They could have bought this instead. And if they bought that, who are you? Why don't you go spend your money the way you should? What are you worried about how they do it? And again, I say, if you're in control of other people's money, you should respect that immensely, seriously. But here's what he's doing. He's looking at her resources and saying, here's what I would have done it. No one cares what you think about what she could have done with it. It wasn't yours to give, bud, right? Now, Judas in this moment is criticizing her. The word criticize, by the way, very fascinating. It says they criticized her. We're going to read in a moment that the house is filled with this aroma. The word criticize, it's primal, and it's the idea of a horse snorting. They literally are blowing their noses and snorting at her. I mean, how offensive could you possibly be to a woman who just offered something so sacred to her Lord? And they're, look at this waste, look at this waste. Can you imagine the attitude? The translators do their best to say they criticized her sharply. They tried to make her feel bad about this. And as I joked a minute ago, but seriously, all the Lord would have had to do is say, yeah, Mary, hello, kind of reckless. But he doesn't do that, does he? He says, this is precious, you idiots. He didn't say that. I added that little tiny piece in there. I don't want you to go and quote that, or nowadays with the Facebook clips or whatever. He called them all idiots. Anyway, they're snorting at her as the aroma fills the room. What kind of waste is this? It was Pastor Ken Graves, who was with us a number of years ago in Searsmont, when he came and taught a part of this passage, and he said, if I remember his quote, something like, Judas was the original Democrat. Haha. I said it. He said it, actually. I'm saying what he said. So, he said Judas was the original Democrat. He's got it all here in one package, man. It's awesome. You ready what he does? He virtue signals. Here's what I would have done. Well, that's wonderful. What are you actually doing? You're virtue signaling, right? And gaslighting galore, right? Here's what you could have done. Here's what you should feel bad for what you've done and all. That's why Ken said he is the original Democrat, right? And I find it fascinating that people that are so willing to accuse other people of those things are guilty of it themselves, like Judas. Look at this waste. Your whole life is a waste. What are you talking about? Your whole life is a waste, man. And this guy's taken to criticizing her. Here's what we would have done. Here's what could have been done. Here's what should have been done. Criticizing. So, with that being established, let's turn to John chapter 12. And you might be wondering, aren't you worried about a Democrat being in the audience? Not really. You know why? Because they're usually not here. Frankly, seriously. And the one or two that might be here, if they have any real sense, we'll talk about this. Hey, I was kind of offended by you. We'll have a conversation like, man, I totally get it. Love you. We can disagree. Something like that. So am I worried about one or two? No, not at all. Just to be frank with you. Otherwise, you have just some crazy, debased mind that won't see any reason. So that's why I don't worry about that too much. So, John chapter 12. That'll make a great clip too, right there. We can use that as well. But John chapter 12, we're going to read the same story to get the full picture and the context in which we don't get otherwise. So watch this, starting in verse 1. I mean, it's just so much here. Then, chapter 12, John, verse 1. Then, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany. Well, didn't we just read it's 2 days before Passover? Here's what Mark's doing with his gospel, which he does frequently. He doesn't do it chronologically. He's doing blast pictures together. And what he does with the story in Mark 14 is he takes the backdrop. If you're familiar with like diamonds, like in commercials or in real life, they'll take a black backdrop and put a diamond in front of it to accentuate the beauty of the diamond, right? So that's what Mark is doing with chapter 14. He's showing you that, meanwhile, the backdrop is the religious leaders are wanting to kill Jesus, okay? And we're leading right up to the Passover. But the beautiful diamond is this story of this woman who offers everything, who sacrifices and gives so much. So truly, the story we need to understand of that we're reading in Mark 14 is actually happening 6 days before the Passover. And Jesus, it says, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. And there they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was the one who sat at the table with him. And then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. So this gives us an element that we don't get in Mark's gospel, and that is that she anoints his head primarily, but also his feet, and wipes his feet with her hair. Now, not to be confusing, but Luke chapter 7 tells us a story of a woman doing something similar, with a similar sort of ointment. But it says, first of all, it's earlier in Jesus' ministry, first of all. And the other thing is, it tells us that woman was a sinner or a prostitute type lady. So she comes in with all of her baggage in Luke chapter 7 and does something similar. Perhaps an inspiration to Mary, who would ultimately do it at the end here. So just file that away. Luke 7 is not the same as this story. But she uses her hair to wipe his feet. And then this is a great detail in verse 3. The house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. That's a beautiful detail, not in Mark's gospel. The house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. That's why they're snorting. That's why they're, can't believe it. What are you doing? Look at all this waste. Because something we need to understand is this fragrance was so potent and so powerful that it filled the room because its expense. There was no alcohol like we have in perfumes and colognes today. To do fast drying, that wasn't the point. The point was to saturate and soak in the skin. And so the smell would be on your body for weeks, which is a beautiful note to be made. That as she's doing this, days before the cross, as the Lord is in the Garden of Gethsemane weeping and his pores are opening and bleeding out, that fragrance is coming out. As he's on the cross, that fragrance is smelled every so often by him. As he's being whipped on a whipping post, that fragrance is being smelt by him. So amazing to think about, but that fragrance filled the house. The fragrance filled the house. I guess the question I'd ask, to be applicational for just a moment to you, is what does your house smell like? What does your house smell like? I guess that's kind of a weird question now that I actually say it out loud. I thought it was a little bit smoother in my head. Maybe I should say this. Does your house smell like addiction or anger or pain or wrath? Is that what your house smells like? I hope your house smells more like joy and peace and worship. Because your house will smell like what's in it. Your house will smell like what's in it. And if you're having Bible studies and prayer and fellowship and sweet times of Bible reading in your house, that'll fill and take over that house. If you're addicted and angry and full of wrath, all that, that'll just smell all through your house. The story I often share is a story. Years ago, I went into some people's house. I had a job to do, and beautiful house, like a magazine home. At the time, a number of years ago, it was like cutting edge. It had some really like artistic kind of stuff in it, and beautiful, like a dream home for people, you know. And going in there and having a simple life and a simple home, I looked around. I was like in awe. The guys that were with me in awe, like wow. Look, like we were wanting to be very careful, roll up the rugs, lay out all the plastic and all this stuff. We don't want to damage anything. But you know what's funny about that? At that time in my life, that was the most beautiful home I had ever been in my life. Truly, beautiful, ornate, decorated, whatever. But the sensation that was there was the worst I'd ever experienced in my life. Most beautiful home by the eye, but by the Spirit, it was the darkest, nastiest home that we could not wait to get out of every single day. There was just such an oppression and a darkness and it didn't make sense until we finally met the husband. And he came home and there was just such an anger and a tension, and it was like he wasn't even at home and it was there. It was there in his house. Before we ever met the guy, I knew what he was like. Unbelievable. In fact, he's sitting right here. No, I'm just kidding. He's not here at all. No, this was years and years ago. We lived far, far away from here. But truly, in fact, his nickname was Dookie, by the way. I learned about that later. I thought, what a perfect nickname for that guy, right? Dookie. Anyway, old Dookie was such a mean guy, though. Man. And just anger and tension and just and as beautiful as the house was, you made good money and you did this and that. It's like I didn't want to be in that house. But then years later, not maybe just a few years ago now, when I was in Africa, I think I've told some of you know the story, but I was invited. Well, in fact, what happened was there was a leader at the church that had been at the church for days. It blew my mind. He was just there for days, but he couldn't get home for a number of reasons, but he was very involved in serving at the church, and he was excited to go home and see his family, but the night was getting later and later, and he still didn't have an opportunity to get home. So I said, well, why don't we just get him home? And the assistant pastor was like, well, I can't drive legally, but if you can drive, I can tell you how to get there. We're driving on the other side of the road in Africa, man. I said, sure, why not? Sounds awesome. Well, what they did not tell me, because when I got back, everyone's like, you did that? I was like, yeah, why? They're like, that's the most dangerous area, and that's like the Autobahn at this time of night. I'm like, yeah, I know. I didn't know at all. I had no, it blew my mind, because when I went on this journey, truly there were cars, there were accidents everywhere, people were it was like crazy mayhem. Get through all that, drive on these long dirt roads, get in the middle of nowhere with no street lights, and stop at this guy's house. So again, I always look back on that whenever my friends are like, I can't believe you did that. I'm like, yeah, I know. Just sign up for dangerous stuff. That's what I do. I had no idea. I really had, my wife would have killed me if I would have done something like that. So I didn't mean to do that. But all that to say that I ended up at this guy's house. And it was the most simple home I have ever gone into in my life. But he woke his son up. Dylan, I still remember his name. He woke Dylan up. He said, Dylan, come here. You got to meet this pastor from America. And he was like, what? He opens his little eyes, and Dylan was about my son's age. Oh my gosh. And they were so accommodating. What can we do? I'm like, honestly, I just want to get back to real life. I want to get back to at least the place that I'm familiar with in Africa. So I didn't want to be there long. But the hospitality and the beauty and the warmth in that home was like nothing I've ever experienced in a home in America, ever. And it was in some far out place in Africa with this beautiful family that loved God. So if I can say that, what does your home smell like? It doesn't matter how much money you got in your house. It matters what's in your house, right? What's your home smell like? Because I kind of want my home to smell like Africa, if you know what I mean. Definitely not Dookie's place. We don't want to smell like Dookie. Anyway, that's a whole other Bible study, and we don't have much time left. Oh. But in verse 4, one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, "Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" This he said, not that he cared for the poor. Here's the key that we don't get in the Mark chapter 14. It's not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and he had the money box and he used to take from it. Oh, that'd be helpful to know, wouldn't it, folks? Well, because he sounded so pious, didn't he? He sounded so righteous and good and kind. Oh, why was this money sold? Or used this way? We could have done so many good things with it, like line your pockets. Because that's what he would have really done. That's why he was really upset. Isn't that frustrating when people put false pretense ahead of it? Oh, we could have done this. Oh, we could have done that. Oh, I can't believe we would let that happen. And the best part, verse 7 and 8, watch this. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She's kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you will have with you always, but me you do not always have." Here's a sad reality that we cannot escape. Until the coming of Christ, there will always be poor people on this earth because people are sinful, sick, and weird, right? We, as Jesus said, will always have the poor amongst us. That is not to justify never helping them. That is to say that you can't always use that argument. Oh, there's poor people in the world. Oh, yeah, so what? I shouldn't drink this bottle of water because some poor person needs it? You got to chill out with that. That's crazy. The Lord even said, listen, there will always be poor people. There will never be a lack of poor people to help on this earth. Let me put it to you a different way, in a way that he's essentially suggesting it. Watch this. To the people that argue that point, oh, if this could have only been used in such a different way, we could have helped the poor in the earth and all this. Okay, really? If you're so bent out of shape about poor people, what are you doing with your finances to help them? Oh, I find that usually it's nothing. Nothing. Oh, well, that's because I don't have the kind of resources. Oh, but here you are, because they have lots of resources. You want to criticize them for the amount that they didn't use, but you're not doing any yourself. That's really weird, right? That just drives me crazy. Folks, you'll always have the poor with you. Always. And if you care so much about them, why don't you help them? Oh, you don't. It's like the argument that people make, the gospel, what about the man in this foreign place that no one's ever been to, and it's just him and his donkey, to which I have so many questions about that guy. How did he get there? And he has no recollection of parents, but he got a donkey with him? What a bonus. This is a crazy, people use this as a debunking Christianity, because, well, all the people, what about him? He's going to be judged for sin when he's never been reached by a person? But here's one question I love to ask that person. If you're so concerned about them, why don't you go find them? Oh, that's right, because they're mythical. They're not even real. And you don't even care enough to go yourself. You see how that works, right? And there's a way more full biblical answer to that, by the way. It's every man will be judged based on the knowledge that he has. God has revealed himself through creation. Even the man, without any verbal communication from another human being in his life, knows in his heart that there is a creator. And he will commune in some way to him. And those that ask and seek and knock, it will be opened and they will find. So anyway, I'm just saying the point is, if you care so much about this random person that lives on some remote island, why don't you go try to find them and minister the gospel to them? Because you don't care. It's an argument. It's a means to an end of a conversation for you or me. So I'm going to give you a real example of this. Not too many years ago, I don't know exactly when the Ark Encounter was built, but I watched the Ark Encounter built in real time. I watched the live streams and the things that Ken Ham was putting out. Now, if you don't know, in Kentucky, a man named Ken Ham, who has started a ministry called Answers in Genesis, has built a life-size Noah's Ark. And there really is something to seeing the magnitude of it and appreciating. It took Noah 100 years to build this thing. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have been to the Ark Encounter? Just a handful of us in the room. Amazing, isn't it? Incredible. And so, having just recently been there, I was reminded, because it's the largest timber frame structure in the world. Okay, for that alone, I was interested in the thing. But there was so much that came out of that, so many great lessons that came out of that. You ready? When Answers in Genesis, Ken Ham was building this, one of the number one things levied against the ministry was, how come they take all this money and build this big stupid boat that's just for tourism when they could help all these poor people? Sound familiar? Judas. That's what I said in my heart. Here's the thing. Ken Ham, who is no stranger to a good comeback, he said the Ark Encounter is going to cost about $100 million to build. In the end, it cost $1.2 million to build. 1.2. And so he said, at the time before they finished it, he said it's going to be about $100 million to build this boat. He's like, the real reason people don't like it is because it's a reminder of the judgment of God on this earth, and that God will not judge the earth by rain again, but he will by fire. So he's like, people don't like it because it's a reminder of God's previous judgment. But he said the Ark Encounter is going to cost $100 million to build. And he said the same person that would argue that said we should have given this money to the poor, is the same person that would get on a cruise ship that costs no less than $500 million to build. A cruise ship for entertainment and pleasure, right? Boats and water slides, whee! He said minimum, and it's true, look it up, the smallest one that you could go for is $500 million to build it, up to $2 billion to build one of those bad boys. And he says the same person that would say to us who's building a $100 million boat, we can't do it because we could have given it to the poor. Why don't you start writing Carnival and all the cruise ships company and telling them to give all their money to the poor? Because it's just an argument for people. And one of the things that really blessed me about Answers in Genesis is they actually ended up suing Kentucky at one point. I don't know if you know that or not, because the reason they built the Ark in Kentucky was because of some financial benefits that was allowed to every tourist attraction. Anyone that was bringing tourism into Kentucky would be granted this program, whatever it was. Well, they initially gave the okay for it, but when Answers in Genesis came time to open, they removed it. They rescinded. You like that word? They rescinded it from them. Imagine that, rescinding from a Christian group. And they did. And they rescinded it. And what all good Christians do when that happens is they sue, right? Anyways, that's what he did. And he sued them and he won. And he won because it was discrimination. And the only answer that the state of Kentucky had was because they were Christian, they didn't like it. Well, that's called discrimination. Thank you for the money. Have a good day. That's how that went down. So I appreciate all of that immensely. But all that goes right back to this kind of a story here. Judas Iscariot, doesn't he sound so wonderful and thoughtful and kind? Oh, look at what we could have done with all this money. I could have ripped off so much of it and used it for myself, is what he's really thinking. But he wouldn't say that. He wouldn't come out and say that. He's saying, oh, the poor among us, they need this so desperately. You don't care about the poor. Don't even get me started about foreign missions sometimes. You know, you go to the same place in some of the third world countries and see the same house in the same conditions for years. The kids still don't have shoes. How is that possible? We've sent hundreds of thousands of dollars to this organization to put shoes on these kids. Oh, it's optics. You want the kids to not have shoes, so we keep sending money to you. That stuff needs to be vetted, man. That's scary. That's sad business. All under the guise of we're helping poor kids all over the world. You mean you're helping yourselves to living without having to work in a foreign land on a beautiful waterfront property is what you're trying to do. It's sickening. It's all over the place. It's the Judas mentality. But we better jump off that train. We only got a few minutes here, folks, so let's go to verse 6 of Mark 14 again. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why are you troubling her? She's done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish, you can do good to them." You see that? Anytime you want, you can help poor people, Judas. But me you do not always have. For what she has done, she has done what she could. And she has come beforehand to anoint my body for burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her. That's incredible. Okay, first of all, we already talked about the fact that she's anointing him for his burial. Understand, let's all understand this together. She is listening to what he is saying. I think we all struggle with this. I'm saying myself included. To actually hear what is being said, not what we want to hear. And we all do that to some strange degree. We will listen and listen and listen in such a way we are listening to hear what we want. And it's an amazing syndrome of the human race. Mary does not do that. The 12 disciples do that, right? Like, i.e., they're like just confronted about how they should not be arguing about who's the greatest. And they're like, yeah. Well, Peter, who is the greatest, though? Seriously. It's like, hello? He didn't just say, I'll keep arguing about that. He said, stop arguing about that, right? Here's what I mean. She is doing this knowing that he is going to be killed and that he is going to be buried. What is fascinating is she's doing this in case she might not be able to be part of putting him in the grave. She is anointing him ahead of time because she has no idea what that's going to look like. She's not holding out like, oh, maybe once he's dead, she doesn't know how he's going to die, but once he's dead, I don't know if I'll ever be able to get to him again. But he's here in this house, and I'm here, and I'm doing this right now. That's what she's doing for his burial. She knows it because she's listening to what he's been saying about the fact that he's going to be betrayed and killed. And so she's listening, and she does something about it. What's amazing is she doesn't say anything in all of this. You notice that? She only does. Everyone else is doing all the talking. Do you notice that? She is just doing. And what's amazing is all the disciples are wondering and have argued about who's the greatest, who's going to be the most prominent, who's going to be remembered more, who's going down in the history books. And you know what he just said? She's going down in the history books. And can we just point out how awesome and prophetic that is, by the way? Just go back with me 2,000 years in the home that is in Bethany. As this scenario unfolds in real time, 2,000 years ago, in a simple home in Bethany, the Lord Jesus says, wherever the gospel goes, this story will be told. And here we are, 2,000 years later, in Belfast, Maine, studying this story and remembering what this woman did and thinking of the implications on our own lives. That's incredible. That's powerful. And he says, assuredly, truly I tell you, wherever the gospel goes, what she has done will be echoed around the world wherever the gospel goes. And how true that is. How amazing that is. How prophetic. And then we wind down with these last few verses here. Chapter 14 of Mark, verse 10. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. So they sought how he might conveniently betray him. Some have said this is the straw that broke the camel's back. You understand that expression, right? You put so much weight on this camel that finally all it takes is that one last little bit of weight, the straw that broke the camel's back. This is the straw that breaks Judas's back right here. This final moment when he ushers his statement of what is going on here with this waste of money. And the fact that the Lord doesn't side with him is he's like, that's it, I'm done. Another reason for the contrast in Mark 14. But an amazing thing to consider, Judas Iscariot. Let me read this to you. William MacDonald quotes a commentator in saying that anyone could follow Christ as a disciple for 3 years and see all his miracles, hear all his teaching, receive at his hand repeated kindness, be counted an apostle, and yet prove rotten at heart in the end. All this at first sight appears incredible and impossible. Yet the case of Judas shows plainly that the thing can be. Few things perhaps are so little realized as the extent of the fall of man. It is truly amazing that in the story and the ministry of Jesus Christ, there is this character that is so wicked at heart. And he's seen all these miracles. And underlying all of that, he's not changing. He's unrepentant. He's hard-hearted. And he's going to turn over the Messiah and betray him. He doesn't just blend in. He becomes an adversary, an opponent to the Messiah. It's a terrible move. He'll be haunted to the day of his death. In fact, it's not long after he's betrayed that Judas goes out, as we know, and hangs himself, kills himself from all the guilt of it. But here's the thing. She, quote unquote, wasted this resource of a year's salary. He will betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. That was the price that you would pay for an ox that was broken. A gored ox, they called it. If you had an ox that was like injured and wasn't able to function fully, you're like, I'll give you 30 pieces of silver for it. That was the going rate. Or a broken slave. He took 1/10 of what this woman gave willingly from her heart. Here's the thing, and a good warning for every one of us as we think about these two characters in contrast. Judas, my friends, was a slave to money. He was a slave to it. He didn't own it, it owned him, right? Money can do that. And the old saying is, money is a great servant, but it's a cruel master. And if we're not careful, money will just take over our lives, and we don't even realize we have to become subservient to it. I need more, I need more, I need more, I need more. And everyone's like, slow down. Remember when they asked J.D. Rockefeller, hey, when does a man have enough? And you remember what he said famously? A little bit more. Oh, there's no end to the desire of how much you want. It'll never stop. You'll never, ever, 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 ever have enough. Ever. Ever. And Judas was just a slave to money. Now here's what's interesting. To the worshiper, Mary, to the worshiper, there's no price too high. To the observer, any price is too high. You see that? To the worshiper, there is no price that is too high to offer the Lord. For an example, our lives. Our lives. Do you know Charlie Kirk, one of his famous sort of ongoing statements in the last few years of his life was, "Here I am, send me." And his wife, they had these talks like, she's like, "Charlie, you're saying like the Lord can have every part and every aspect of your life." He said, "Yes, even my life itself." And for his closest of friends to say to him, if Charlie could go back and know days ahead of time what his death would mean for this country, he would do it. He would do it because he was a willing servant to the Lord. Not only would he do it, he did do it. He did offer himself. He put himself out there in such a way. There's no price too high for a worshiper. But for an observer, any price is too high. What kind of waste are we talking about here? To one it's waste, to another it's worship, right? What one person sees as worship, another person sees, what a waste. Why would you waste that? Why would you waste your time on a Sunday? Why would you go to it? Why would you waste? It's not a waste. It's worship, man. It's giving of ourselves. It's giving what we have to the King. Because it's good dress rehearsal for the future, isn't it? Because I have a weird feeling based on the Bible, that's what we're going to be doing forever, right? Is worshiping the Lord. And here's what I know. When we get to heaven, based on the lives that we lived, we get a storehouse of wealth given to us. That's your ultimate bank account, by the way. I don't know what your earthly bank account's like, but you have a heavenly one. The Bible teaches us this. And when you get to heaven for all eternity, you're only going to get so many resources. And what do we do with those resources? We get rich. No, I'm just kidding. We don't. Actually, what we do is we take our resources and we worship the Lord with them. And I'm telling you, and it's not a matter of merit and being better than someone else. It's just not having stuff to worship the Lord with. And it has everything to do with our attitude and our actions here on earth right now. We're storing up. Didn't the Lord teach that? Store up treasures for yourselves in heaven. Why? So we can worship Him in the future. And I have jokingly said my worst fear is to get to heaven and he's, on his throne like Santa Claus, which don't get that image, but he's just handing out bags of gems and diadems to people. And you're like, oh, I could worship and that'd be such an awesome worship service. And then it comes to you and he gives you like that multicolored hat with a propeller on top. And he just kind of fits it. Oh yeah, one size fits all right there, buddy. Oh, and hold on, he reaches in his chair and he grabs a mint with a hair on it. Oh, there you go. He's like, well, that's the life you live. That's what you get to worship me with. Isn't that awesome? Everything that we worship with, which to some people is a waste here and now, we might feel dumb, like Mary felt dumb maybe for a moment. Not when we get there. Not when we get there and we're like, booyah, booyah. It wasn't a waste. It was never a waste. It was always worship. If we could just remember that, friends. What to most people is a waste is worship. So let's pray together.